Hey folks, it's Nate. Thanks for joining me at the art table again today. We're back with another section of 20th Century Boys. I'm almost caught up to where I wanted to be this year. Makes me pretty excited. So let's dive right into it. When last we left off, we had the FDP beginning to make plans for a memorial for our friend. We had the first stirrings of another pandemic kicking off. There was more cases of the deadly killer virus from Bloody New Year's Eve. We also got a proper introduction to Haru Namio, who is not just an enka singer working for the FTP, but secretly the drummer for Kenji's band, and a sleeper agent working with Maro to undermine the FTP from within. Finally, we are reminded of Karo Yan, a character we haven't really seen since the beginning of the story, who got married in the first few chapters and pretty much dropped off the radar ever since. He's going to be important again. He's going to be off our radar for a while longer. So let's just sort of pass on from there. Finally, we went to a quiet little town in Germany where things are going not so great. There are outbreaks there too, and the people are having a rough time, but so far, they're holding it together. So, when last we saw our heroes, they were going back to Friendland to break into the VR game and see if they could get some insight into our friend's mindset before he died. What is he planning? How does he hope to actually pull off this thing where the Pope is assassinated and he becomes president of the world? Well, we don't immediately see the outcome of that. Instead, we see the memorial to Friend kicking off. The FDP and Manjome in particular are watching over it. And this is a very interesting chapter because up until this point, well, up until really Friend's death, we didn't have a very clear picture of what Manjome's motivation was. We didn't really know, was he a shyster out for himself? Or was he a politician who was just taking advantage of an opportunity? Well, it turns out he's a believer. He really does believe that Friend can pull off this whole plan where he becomes president of the world. And so he hitches his wagon to that. So in many ways, he is kind of a shyster and a politician, but he believes in our friend to the point where he believes he can at least, our friend can at least do what he set out to do, and it's better to go along with him. Now that our friend is dead, Manjome is at a loss. He's not brilliant enough to do this. He's not confident enough to do this. He doesn't really believe in this crazy idea. So ultimately, he begins to break down. We see him arguing with his wife. We see him go to the morning chamber, and he places a spoon with him. More on that in a minute. And then he does drugs, which is, well, we've seen him do that before, so it's not really that surprising. But he seemed to have it under control before, and this time he doesn't. Finally, we see him going into the VR game as well, because this is, he feels, the only way he can get insight into our friend. And what happens there is a surprisingly introspective character building sequence, especially for this point in the story. Most of this focuses on Yoshitsune. Yoshitsune has led this mission because he's worked at Friendland for a long time. He has a bunch of insiders who can work with him. He takes Kyomi and Kana so that they can, Kyomi's been in the game, of course, and Kana is connected to Friend, and she has that weird precognitive thing going, so maybe she'll know if they're going to get in trouble. Kana is left outside the game as a watchman, and Kyomi and Yoshitsune go in together. They look around, Yoshitsune becomes very nostalgic, and eventually they discover a difference. Kyomi goes to the lot where the secret base was, and what they find instead is a bowling alley. This bowling alley is a difference that is important, although we're not sure why it's important. Yoshitsune eventually figures out that, yes, this is correct. If it is really 1971, the bowling alley should be there, and the secret base should be gone. It was bulldozed in spring of 1971, and the kids lost their secret base before the summer started. And all of this points to a very important development that I can't really talk about yet. Talk about it a little more in a future volume. But it shows us that it was in fact important that Yoshitsune's memories of 1970 didn't line up with Kyomi's visit to 1971. We also get a funny reveal. Of course, this bowling alley was built as part of the bowling craze that swept Japan, and the King of Evil who built it, that the kids resented for taking away their secret base, turns out to be none other than Kami-sama, because, of course, who else is obsessed with bowling? So, this really serves, though, other than to tell us that Kyomi has a very strong knack for bowling, and Kami-sama wants to make her a pro bowler, it serves mostly as a moment of introspection for Yoshitsune, who tries to remember what everyone is doing, and he can't remember what he was doing. Excuse me. He knows that Kenji was listening to music because he was trying to be a world-famous guitarist. Acho was studying because he's on the academic track and he's going to try and get into a good school. Karo-yan and Maro were helping out with their parents' stores. We actually see him run into Mon-chan, who is playing at the arcade. This is kind of an emotional moment for him because he hasn't seen Mon-chan in 12 years, and all of a sudden here he is as a kid again. But Yoshitsune is kind of wrapped up in nostalgia for a bit because he doesn't remember what he was doing, and he feels like Yoshitsune has this complex where he feels like he was worthless, and not even being able to remember what he himself was doing at this time period just reinforces it. In the meantime, outside of the game, we see Kana and her assistant from Yoshitsune's group reacting to Manjome entering the game. And at this point, Kyoko snaps Yoshitsune out of his funk, and Manjome dives deeper into his. We're going to explore those divergent lines quite a bit, actually, in this story. But we're going to step out of the VR for just a minute to see what else is going on. We see the Chief Dream Navigator. He's kind of contemptuous of Manjome's collapse, and he is collapsing right before our eyes. She kind of takes over. She gives some orders in his stead. She goes out to do her job and collect a guy who should have been reconditioned at Friendland, but wasn't. We see her do pretty much the same song and dance she did with Kyomi, which tells us this is pretty stock psychological manipulation stuff rather than something special they did for her. And then we see her look out the window at this person in the rain, an umbrella, and this is her reaction to that, which is very interesting. She can obviously see under that umbrella where we cannot, but she bolts out into the rain and looks around, having lost the person she saw, and we see her crying, which is probably the only serious emotion we've seen from her ever in the story. Even when she smiles, it's quite obviously faked for the purpose of, well, disconcerting people, to be honest. So, back in the VR, Yoshitsune and Kyomi are following Donkey around. And it is at this time that we realize that we are going back to the science classroom again. This is interesting because the science classroom was never really that important. It really just felt like an urban legend that got brought up to kind of give the school some flavor. And of course, it was used as an important character moment for Donkey when he was introduced and eulogized at the beginning of the story. And it really didn't feel like it was important again after that. One of the things I have learned as I did a little research, because I've been marshaling my final thoughts on the story and seeing how much of them, my memories of the final part of the story are supported by the actual text. And I came to the realization that, for one thing, I found an interview with Urasawa where he said he often writes things in that he doesn't think are going to be important, and then he gives them more importance, or he works them out as he goes through the story, which is a common writing technique. It's a lot harder to do in an ongoing story, like a manga that runs for 10 years or so, like this one. But he does manage to put together a pretty coherent arc to a lot of these things, and it really feels like this part of the story with the science lab, although it's not one of the examples he cited in that interview, this part feels like it had the same thing happen. It's something he wrote early on, and then he's elevated it in importance when he got to this part of the story because it helps him pull things together in a very natural fashion. Something we already knew happened and was kind of important to one set of characters, and it's getting important for another set of characters as well. So, just a brief recap. They know there is a student who wanted to dissect a frog in the science room one day, and supposedly died before he got the chance. So now his ghost haunts the science lab. His name is Katsumata-kun, and everyone believes he's there. But in the present day, we're told that no student ever died while Kenji and his friends were in the school. So really, it does feel a lot like the kind of ghost story you might hear in a school or around a big campus of any kind, whether it be like a mall or I guess really malls or schools are the kinds of places that have those stories, or at least they are around here. If you can think of any other place that tends to collect those kind of hospitals obviously have a bunch of urban legends as well. So it feels very natural in that respect. So we get that set up, put in our heads again. The use of this story element, although it really does seem retconned now that I look at it and seriously think about it, is still very deft for the most part. Not for a while yet, but we are going to talk about the parts that don't feel deft at some point. So with this established, we go back to Manjome. We see him when he's young, and he's a salesman, and he's sleazy. And we also see him when he's old, looking at himself when he's young, with a certain amount of contempt. And this does serve to build a contrast. Manjome was more of the mask he wore of the sleazy schemer that he really seemed to have for most of the story used to be all he was. And although it's twisted and very unpleasant, it really does seem like Manjome grew meeting Friend and becoming a part of his organization, for better or for worse. Anyway, so the kids go to the school. They find the science classroom much as we remember the story in the past. They get ready to go up there and plug in that air filter for the air tank because Mon-chan forgot to do it, as we were reminded of when we met him in the bowling alley. And then we cut back to the real world. And we have another one of these moments where, in this case, Yukiji is walking around Chinatown and she sees someone. Astonished, she chases him. Doesn't catch them. Then she runs into Acho, who also saw this figure. They have seen the shadow of our friend, Chinatown. And it's mysterious, especially in Acho's case, because Acho was there when our friend was killed. In fact, Acho took his pulse and confirmed he was dead. So how can this happen? He's played dead before, of course. He did after Bloody New Year's Eve, for example. But actually saw the body this time. Very unsettling. Very apt. But more on that later, because we are, after all, going to the classroom. Everyone is going to wind up there. Yoshitsune heads there, Manjome heads there. And then somebody else logs in and starts clearing the game at a very rapid pace. And this is detected, of course, by Yoshitsune's outsiders, Kana, and the other member of his organization. And Kana decides that she has to go in and warn them. And this sets up really the climax of this arc. So Kana sends herself into the game, She has a brief meeting with Kenji, which is more of an emotional moment for her to kind of ground her a little bit. It's been a while since we've seen Kana really be a main character in the story, but perhaps this reminds us some of her motivations while also feeling very natural for what they're doing. It's a good use of the VR conceit to create this character moment. All in all, pretty nice. But ultimately, what has to happen is Donkey has to go up to the science room. And we are once again treated to the sight of a child who looks like they've hung themselves. Of course, we see Sadakio and Yamane there, and Donkey finds them both. And it is our friend. I'm not going to show most of these pages because they show you who he is. And I am, of course, trying not to spoil that. Like I said, I would discuss it one time, then we're going to move on. I will actually probably be discussing it again at the very end of the story as I wrap up thoughts on characters. But for right now, we're going to skip over that. The important thing is that our friend tries to coerce, well, not coerce, enthrall might be a better word. He tries to enthrall Donkey. He says, "You've seen me here. I appear to be hanging from this rope, but I woke up. I'm alive. I'm talking to you." And Donkey is too much of a hard-headed, practical guy to buy this. He's like, "No, this is a trick. You're just pulling a stunt here. I don't believe you're some kind of special guy who died and came back from the dead." And so our friend says, reject him, which means kill him. Or it will eventually. Right now, I think it just means beat him up and run him off. But it's not going to be that simple because Manjome shows up, and there's a confrontation between him and Yoshitsune and Kana, who are there, and of course, with Donkey and company. And then finally, the stranger who has entered the game arrives, and cut back to the real world. Very nice cut right there. Because we never see we don't see who that stranger is at this point. And then we find ourselves back in the real world. We see the doctor's daughter, who's been part of the plot from moment one. She too has seen our friend's ghost in Chinatown, and really freaked out about it. I don't know as I can blame her. She is not really a true believer. She was just in it for herself. And seeing this kind of thing going on, clearly wigged her out a little bit. And finally, we get the reveal. And I will cover this page because it has our friend's face on it. The new player, our friend. And but the one we've seen lying in state, not himself as a child, or the person who was killed in the science room here, presumably. So this is a really fascinating twist here, and I think when you look back on it, it make a certain degree of sense what's happening here. But for right now, as a way to build mystery, the J.J. Abrams mystery box that grabs your attention and holds it, this is a great moment. I don't think it holds up. We'll talk again more about that when we recap the life and times of our friend at the end of the story. Something interesting happens here. Both versions of our friend, the adult and the child, say this is the truth. And then, for reasons we don't immediately understand, the adult version walks up and then grabs our friend's ankles and says, "You die right here, right now," and begins pulling down on them. Now, there is a safety knot in this noose, but when someone's pulling on your legs, that's not going to cut it. So we see our friend's child form begin to choke. Everyone panics. Manjome grabs the adult version of our friend and says, "No, let go of him." There's a stare down between them. Adult friend says, "This is the truth." Then we see not really. We see Manjome kind of stretching out, and then he snaps back to the real world, and he sees a forcible shutdown notice on his computer. He has this great, horrified expression. Every so often, Urasawa gives us these one-page expressions, and they're all brilliant. This is one of them. Man, look at that guy. He has seen something he never expected to see. absolute terror there. Absolute. What? This is the page turn. Urasawa is so good at these. He will give you something like this, and then you have to know what is on that next page. What is it? Man, it's so great. I love it. Our friend. Wow. Wow. That is a killer chapter ending. And if I had been setting up this Takoban, I probably would have said we should just cut it off there. But contractually, they have to give us 2 more chapters. So yeah, we get 2 more chapters. But man, what an ending! I could not have read that in serialization without losing my mind, because I'd have to wait a whole month to get another chapter. Anyways, after this, the program destabilizes a bit, and we basically get a bow on the arc for our heroes. Really, this entire arc was more about Manjome and the events in the real world than it was about Kana or Yoshitsune. But we do get a little bit for them as well. Yoshitsune finds himself, and he learns what he was doing when he was a child. Yoshitsune was building a new secret base, was making some place for his friends to come back to. And this is a great cherry on top of the story, because this is what Yoshitsune has been doing his whole life. He's been watching out for the legacies of his friends, not that one, but Kenji and Acho and Maro and Karoyan and Manchan. He has held close to those bonds, and he has nurtured them, and he has tried to. There's been an image in his head of the other boys and what they want and what's important to them, and he has tried to make a place where those things be realized as easily as possible. For Yoshitsune, the bonds between him and his friends are the most important thing. So in order to maintain those things, he tries to be a person who is of use to them, who makes their lives easier, and that in a lot of fiction that would be displayed as a negative character trait, some kind of codependence. And maybe if it was just one person, it would be codependence. But Yoshitsune is trying to maintain a specific community of people, a specific circle of friends, and he is trying to make it easy for them to maintain those relationships, maintain those friendships, even after a long period of time. Because Yoshitsune, he may have incredible resources, he may have connections, he may be able to snap his fingers and get a helicopter at a moment's notice, but what he really wants is to get his friends back together and work with them once again to accomplish the thing they set out to do, to protect the lives and families that they value so much. And that is, I mean, you can see it in everything he does up until that point, but this is the moment where you really realize, oh, that is his thematic through line in the story. That's what he is. Yoshitsune is the glue that is going to hold all these people together. Kenji brought them together. Yoshitsune will keep them together. And it's a very simple message, but it's really well told, and I liked it a lot. Finally, we also get a moment with Kana. He talks a bit with Donkey. I don't really like this part nearly as much because Kana never had any connection with Donkey whatsoever. She doesn't seem to have met him even when she was a very young child. And it's kind of nice that they talk about doing right and wrong and the importance of these things. And Kana, with her supernatural powers, kind of counterbalances Donkey's extremely pragmatic outlook on life. But this is really just a setup for something that's going to happen later. I feel like it probably didn't need a whole chapter. Could have gone a little faster, but hey, it's not bad. Not bad. I just think especially after that Yoshitsune chapter, which was really good, and I may be biased because Yoshitsune is one of my favorite characters in the story. it feels a little lacking, and it leaves us on not an up note, not a down note, just kind of an note. But again, they have to put a certain number of chapters in these in order to get the story finished in a certain period of time. So I can forgive that, I guess. Not every volume can have a crazy cliffhanger ending like our friend getting shot. Anyways, all in all, pretty good story. Really great development for our antagonists. A big twist with the face-to-face meeting between our friend and Manjome. A really nice moment for Yoshitsune. All in all, we have seen things here that are going to be very important in the third act. Much like the end of the first act set up several things for the second act, we are now setting up things for the third act that aren't really going to add up yet. But great tense writing at the end there. Very interesting character work throughout. Pretty good stuff. Let me know what you thought down in the comments below. We will be looking at the beginning of Volume 8 soon. Till then, I'll talk to you later.